The train whistle echoed across the empty desert as it pulled away from the small Arizona station. A young woman stood on the wooden platform clutching her worn leather suitcase. The heat hit her like a wall, making her long sleeves stick to her skin. She had never felt anything like this back in Boston. Catherine looked around the dusty town. A few wooden buildings lined the main street. Tumbleweeds rolled past her feet. The only sounds were the creaking of old wood and the distant cry of a hawk. This was nothing like the busy streets and tall buildings she knew back east. She picked up her heavy bag and walked toward the trading post. Her boots made soft sounds on the dirt road. Every step kicked up small clouds of dust that settled on her dark blue dress. The dress had looked perfect in Boston. Here it made her stand out like a rose in a cactus field. The trading post was bigger than the other buildings. A wooden sign hung crooked above the door. Inside she could smell leather, tobacco, and something she couldn't name. An older man with a gray beard looked up from behind the counter. "You must be the new teacher," he said, wiping his hands on a dirty apron. "I'm Tom Wilson." "Welcome to Desert Springs." Catherine smiled and set down her bag. "Thank you. I'm Catherine Roberts. I hope I can make a difference here," Tom chuckled. "Well, you sure look different from our last teacher." He was a tough old man who could handle the rowdy kids. "You look like a strong wind might blow you away." She straightened her shoulders. "Don't let my size fool you, Mr. Wilson. I taught in some tough schools back in Boston." "Boston schools and frontier schools are two different things, miss. Out here, some kids have never seen the inside of a classroom. And that's just the settler kids. The Apache children, well, they don't come to school at all." Catherine had heard about the Apache tribe. People back east told scary stories about them, but she had also read books that painted a different picture. They were people just like everyone else. They had families, hopes, and dreams. "Where will I be staying?" she asked. Tom pointed toward a small building next to the trading post. "That's the schoolhouse. There's a small room in the back where teachers stay. It's not much, but it's clean and dry." Catherine walked to the schoolhouse with Tom. The building was simple but sturdy. Inside there were rough wooden desks and a blackboard that had seen better days. Sunlight streamed through two small windows, showing dust dancing in the air. The back room was tiny. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small table. But it was hers. For the first time since leaving Boston, Catherine felt a spark of excitement. "The children will start coming tomorrow," Tom said. "Most are between 6 and 14. Some know their letters, some don't. You'll have your hands full." That evening, Catherine unpacked her few belongings. She had brought books, slate boards, chalk, and paper. She also had a small wooden box that held her mother's jewelry and letters from home. Looking at these things made her feel less alone. As darkness fell, she could hear strange sounds outside. Coyotes howled in the distance. An owl called from somewhere nearby. These were sounds she had never heard in the city. They made her feel both scared and excited. The next morning came too soon. Catherine woke to the sound of children's voices outside. She quickly dressed and stepped out of the schoolhouse. 7 children stood in the yard, ranging from very young to almost grown. They stared at her with curious eyes. "Good morning," she said with a bright smile. "I'm Miss Roberts, your new teacher," the children whispered among themselves. One boy, about 12 years old, stepped forward. "Are you really going to teach us? You don't look like a teacher." "What does a teacher look like?" Catherine asked. The boy shrugged. "Bigger, I guess. And meaner." Catherine laughed. "Well, I promise I'm a real teacher even if I don't look like one. Now, shall we go inside and start learning?" The first day was harder than she had expected. Some children could barely write their names. Others were far ahead in reading. Keeping everyone busy and learning was like trying to juggle balls while riding a horse. During lunch break, Catherine noticed something interesting. In the rocks behind the schoolhouse, she caught a glimpse of someone watching. When she looked closer, the figure disappeared. But she had the feeling someone was very interested in what happened at the school. Over the next few days, the same thing happened. Someone was watching from the rocks. The person was careful to stay hidden, but Catherine's sharp eyes caught small movements. A flash of brown skin, dark hair, or colorful clothing. She began to wonder if it might be one of the Apache children. Tom had said they never came to school, but maybe one was curious. The thought excited her. She had come west hoping to teach all children, not just the settler kids. On Friday afternoon, Catherine tried something new. After the other children left, she took a piece of chalk and wrote simple words on a slate board. She drew pictures next to them, a horse, a tree, a bird. Then she left the slate on a rock where the hidden watcher might find it. The next morning, the slate was gone. In its place was a small, smooth stone with markings scratched into it. Catherine couldn't read the markings, but she understood their meaning. Someone had accepted her gift and left one in return. This became their secret game. Catherine would leave simple lessons on slates and they would disappear. Sometimes she found stones, feathers, or small carved figures in return. She never saw who took the lessons, but she knew someone was learning. The days grew hotter as summer approached. Catherine learned to move more slowly in the heat. She learned which plants had water in them and which animals to avoid. The desert was teaching her its own lessons. The settler children began to trust her. They saw she was firm but fair, smart but kind. She made learning fun with games and stories. Even the older boys who had tried to cause trouble at first began to pay attention, but Catherine wanted more. She wanted to reach the child who watched from the rocks. She wanted to show the Apache people that learning could bring their communities together, not drive them apart. She had no idea that her chance was coming soon, and when it came, it would change everything in ways she never could have imagined. The hidden watcher was closer than she thought, and soon their secret lessons would lead to something much more dangerous and wonderful than either of them expected. The desert had many secrets, and Catherine was about to discover one that would change her life forever. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine arrived in Desert Springs, and the mysterious exchange of learning materials continued. Every afternoon, she would place a slate with simple words and pictures on the large rock behind the schoolhouse. Every morning, she would find it gone, replaced by some small gift from the desert. The gifts were beautiful in their simplicity. Smooth stones worn by wind and water, feathers from desert birds, small pieces of wood carved into animal shapes. Each one told her that someone was not only taking her lessons but treasuring them enough to leave something precious in return. Catherine found herself looking forward to these mysterious exchanges more than anything else in her day. Teaching the settler children was rewarding, but this felt different. This felt like building a bridge across a great divide. On this particular Wednesday morning, she found something different waiting for her. Instead of the usual natural gift, there was a piece of bark with marks scratched into it. The marks looked like the letters she had been teaching, but they were arranged in ways that didn't make English words. She held the bark up to the morning light, trying to understand what her hidden student was telling her. Then it hit her. The marks weren't trying to spell English words. They were someone's attempt to write Apache words using the English letters she had taught. Her heart raced with excitement. This was proof that learning was happening. Someone was taking her alphabet and using it to write in their own language. This was exactly what she had hoped for when she came west. That afternoon, Catherine tried something bold. Instead of leaving just a slate with simple words, she left a piece of paper with her name written in large, clear letters. Catherine. Below it, she drew a picture of herself pointing to her chest. Then she drew a question mark. She was asking her hidden student to tell her their name. The next morning, she almost ran to the rock. There, written in careful letters that showed much practice, was a single word: Swifthawk. Catherine smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. She finally knew the name of her mysterious student. Swifthawk. The name painted a picture in her mind of someone quick and clever, someone who watched from high places. But as the days went on, Catherine began to notice other things. The Apache people seemed to know about her exchanges with Swifthawk. When she went to the trading post, Apache women would look at her with what seemed like curiosity rather than suspicion. Apache men who came to trade would nod at her politely, instead of ignoring her completely. Tom Wilson noticed too. Something's changed, he told her one evening as she bought supplies. The Apache folks seem different around you. More relaxed, maybe. Catherine kept her secret about Swifthawk. She sensed that these exchanges were special, and talking about them might ruin everything. 2 days later, her patience was rewarded in a way she never expected. She was sitting outside the schoolhouse during lunch, eating bread and cheese while reading a book. The settler children were playing a game with sticks and a ball. The air was hot and still with that heavy feeling that sometimes comes before a storm. A shadow fell across her book. Catherine looked up, expecting to see one of her students. Instead, she found herself looking at a young Apache boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He stood perfectly still, watching her with dark, intelligent eyes. Catherine's heart began to beat faster. but she forced herself to stay calm. This had to be Swifthawk, the boy who had been learning from her lessons, who had shared his name, who had been watching from the rocks for weeks. She smiled gently and said, "Hello, Swifthawk." The boy's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't run. Instead, he took a small step closer. Catherine slowly closed her book and set it aside. She didn't want to make any sudden movements that might frighten him away. This moment felt too important to risk. "Would you like to sit?" she asked, patting the ground beside her. Swifthawk looked around nervously. The settler children had stopped their game and were staring. Catherine understood his worry. This was dangerous for him. Apache children weren't supposed to come close to the white settlement, and white teachers weren't supposed to encourage them. "It's all right," Catherine said softly. "You're welcome here." After what felt like a long time, Swifthawk took another step forward. Then another. Finally, he sat down on the ground about 3 feet away from her, close enough to talk, but far enough to run if needed. Catherine opened her book again, but this time she turned it so Swifthawk could see the pictures on the pages. It was a book of fairy tales with beautiful illustrations. She pointed to a picture of a castle and said, "Castle." Then she pointed to a picture of a horse and said, "Horse." Swifthawk listened carefully. Then in a voice that was soft but clear, he repeated the words, "Castle, horse." His pronunciation was good, much better than Catherine had expected. All those weeks of secret lessons had been working better than she dreamed. They spent the rest of lunch break this way, with Catherine showing pictures and saying words, and Swifthawk repeating them. The settler children gradually lost interest and went back to their game, but Catherine noticed they were quieter than usual, stealing glances at the unlikely pair. When it was time for afternoon lessons to begin, Swifthawk stood up. Catherine thought he would leave, but instead he lingered by the schoolhouse door. "Would you like to come inside?" Catherine asked. Swifthawk looked at the door, then at the settler children filing past him into the building. For a moment, Catherine thought he might actually do it, but then he shook his head and stepped back. "Tomorrow?" Catherine asked. Swifthawk nodded once, then turned and ran toward the rocks where he usually hid. But this time he looked back over his shoulder and waved. Catherine waved back, her heart full of hope and excitement. That evening, she wrote in her journal about the day's events. She had been keeping a record of her time in Desert Springs, planning to send letters to her family back in Boston, but this felt too special, too fragile to share with anyone else yet. As she wrote by lamplight, she could hear the usual desert sounds outside her window. Coyotes calling, wind moving through the rocks, the distant sound of Apache drums from their camp. But tonight these sounds didn't seem foreign or frightening. They seemed like music welcoming her into a larger world. She had taken her first real step toward her dream of teaching all children, not just some. Swifthawk had been brave enough to show himself, to trust her enough to sit beside her and learn, but Catherine didn't know that this meeting had been watched by eyes other than those of her settler students. Apache scouts had seen their young ones sitting with the white teacher. The news was already traveling back to the tribal camp, where it would soon reach the ears of someone very important, someone who would have strong feelings about his son learning from the white woman's lessons. The scorching afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Catherine made her way toward the small creek that ran behind the settlement. She needed firewood for her evening cooking, and the dead branches that collected near the water were perfect for her small stove. The temperature had to be over 100 degrees, making every step feel like walking through an oven. Catherine had learned to move differently in this heat. Back in Boston, she would have hurried to finish her chores quickly. Here she had discovered that slow, steady movements were the key to surviving the desert's brutal temperatures. She wore her lightest dress and a wide-brimmed hat that Tom Wilson had insisted she buy from the trading post. As she walked, she thought about Swifthawk. It had been 3 days since their first real meeting outside the schoolhouse. Each day he had appeared again, staying a little longer, coming a little closer. Yesterday he had actually sat on the schoolhouse steps while she taught the afternoon lesson, listening through the open door. The other children were getting used to his presence. At first they had whispered and pointed, but Catherine had quietly asked them to treat Swifthawk with the same respect they showed each other. Children, she had learned, were much better at accepting differences than adults. The creek was nearly dry, as it often was this time of year. Just a thin trickle of water ran between the rocks. but the shade from the cottonwood trees that grew along its banks made the area much cooler than the open desert. Catherine set down her basket and began gathering the dry branches that the wind had blown down. The work was peaceful. The only sounds were the gentle trickle of water, the rustle of leaves above her head, and the occasional call of a bird. She found herself humming a tune her mother used to sing while working in their garden back home. Catherine had filled about half her basket when she heard something that made her blood freeze. A child's scream, high and terrified, coming from somewhere upstream. She dropped her basket and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. The scream came again, even more desperate this time. Catherine pushed through the low branches of a mesquite bush and found herself in a small clearing surrounded by large boulders. What she saw there almost stopped her heart. Swift Hawk was pressed against one of the boulders, his back flat against the rock, his eyes wide with terror. Just 3 feet in front of him, its tail raised and ready to strike, was the largest scorpion Catherine had ever seen. The creature was almost as long as her hand, with a thick, segmented tail that curved over its back. Its claws were spread wide, and she could see the deadly stinger at the end of its tail glistening in the dappled sunlight. This wasn't just any scorpion, this was a bark scorpion, one of the most dangerous creatures in the Arizona desert. Catherine knew about bark scorpions from the warnings Tom Wilson had given her when she first arrived. Their sting could kill a grown man, and it would almost certainly kill a child swifthawk's size. The boy was trapped with nowhere to run. If he moved even slightly, the scorpion would strike. Time seemed to slow down as Catherine's mind raced through her options. She could call for help, but by the time anyone reached them, it would be too late. She could try to distract the scorpion, but that might just make it attack faster. There was really only one choice. Without stopping to think about the danger to herself, Catherine grabbed the thickest branch she could find from the ground beside her. It was about 4 feet long and as thick as her wrist, heavy enough to do damage but light enough for her to swing quickly. "Don't move," she whispered to Swift Hawk, though she wasn't sure he understood English well enough to know what she meant. His terrified eyes met hers, and she saw him nod slightly. Catherine raised the branch high above her head and brought it down with all her strength, aiming for the space just behind the scorpion. She didn't want to hit it directly and risk having it leap toward Swift Hawk in its death throes. The branch struck the ground with tremendous force, sending up a cloud of dust and small rocks. The impact was so close to the scorpion that it was thrown sideways, away from Swift Hawk. Immediately, Catherine swung again, this time connecting directly with the creature and sending it flying into the rocks where it lay still. For a moment, neither Catherine nor Swift Hawk moved. They both stared at the motionless scorpion, hardly believing the danger had passed so quickly. Then Swift Hawk's legs gave out, and he slid down the boulder to sit on the ground, shaking all over. Catherine dropped her branch and rushed to his side. "Are you hurt?" she asked, kneeling beside him and checking his arms and legs for any sign of a sting. Swift Hawk shook his head, but Catherine could see he was in shock. His breathing was quick and shallow, and his hands were trembling. When she looked more closely, she saw that he had scraped his leg badly on the rough rock while pressing himself against the boulder. Blood was seeping through a tear in his buckskin pants. Catherine pulled out her handkerchief and the small water bottle she always carried. She wet the cloth and gently cleaned the scrape on Swift Hawk's leg. The cut was deep enough to need bandaging, but it wasn't dangerous. This might hurt a little, she warned, though again she wasn't sure how much he understood, but the gentle tone of her voice seemed to calm him. As she worked, Catherine realized she needed more cloth to properly bandage the wound. Without hesitation, she tore several strips from the bottom of her petticoat. The white cotton was clean and would work perfectly as bandages. Swift Hawk watched with fascination as she carefully wrapped his leg. His breathing had returned to normal, and the color was coming back to his face. When she was finished, he touched the bandage gently and looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said in English, the words clear and carefully pronounced. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. It was the first time she had heard him speak English, and he had chosen to say the words that meant the most. "You're very welcome," she replied, helping him to his feet. Swift Hawk tested his weight on the injured leg. It was tender, but he could walk. Catherine picked up her water bottle and offered it to him. He drank gratefully, then handed it back with another small, "Thank you." They walked slowly back toward the settlement, Catherine carrying her basket of firewood and Swift Hawk limping slightly beside her. She kept one hand near his shoulder, ready to steady him if he stumbled. As they emerged from the creek area, Catherine saw several Apache warriors on horseback in the distance. They were clearly searching for something, or someone. When they spotted Catherine and Swifthawk walking together, they rode quickly toward them. Catherine's heart began to race again, but for a different reason this time. She had no idea how the Apache warriors would react to finding their child with a white woman, especially a child who was obviously injured. The lead warrior was a man Catherine had never seen before, but his bearing and the way the others deferred to him told her he was someone important. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with long black hair and clothing decorated with silver ornaments. His face was stern but not unkind, and his dark eyes missed nothing as he looked from Catherine to Swifthawk and back again. Swifthawk immediately began speaking in Apache, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement to tell the story. He pointed to Catherine, then to his bandaged leg, then back toward the creek. He made gestures that clearly showed the scorpion and Catherine's actions in saving him. The warrior listened carefully, his expression growing more surprised with each detail. When Swifthawk finished his story, the man looked at Catherine with what seemed like a mixture of gratitude and something else she couldn't identify. He spoke a few words in Apache to Swifthawk, who nodded and limped toward one of the other warriors. The man lifted the boy onto his horse with gentle hands, clearly relieved to have found him safe. But the lead warrior remained, studying Catherine with those dark, intelligent eyes. Finally, he spoke in careful English. "You saved my son's life." Catherine felt her breath catch. This wasn't just any Apache warrior. This was Swifthawk's father, and from the respect the other men showed him, he was clearly a leader among his people. Any mother would have done the same. Catherine replied simply. The man's expression softened slightly at her words. He nodded once, a gesture that seemed to convey both thanks and something like respect. Then he turned his horse and rode away with his men, Swifthawk looking back over his shoulder and waving until they disappeared behind the rocks. Catherine stood alone in the desert, watching them go. She had no idea that she had just saved the son of Chief Thundercloud, one of the most powerful leaders in the Apache Nation, and she had no idea that her act of courage would set in motion events that would change her life in ways she never could have imagined. The evening after the scorpion incident, Catherine sat in her small room behind the schoolhouse, still shaken by what had happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote in her journal by lamplight, trying to capture every detail of the terrifying encounter and its aftermath. She couldn't stop thinking about the look in Swifthawk's father's eyes when he had said, "You saved my son's life." There had been something profound in that moment, something that went beyond simple gratitude. It felt like a door had opened between two worlds that had been kept carefully separate. Catherine had torn the strips from her petticoat without a second thought, but now she realized the significance of that action. In Apache culture, she had learned from Tom Wilson's stories, clothing was precious and practical. Her willingness to destroy her own clothing to help Swifthawk would not have gone unnoticed. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the schoolhouse. Catherine was preparing her lessons when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Through her window, she saw 3 Apache women dismounting near the front of the building. They moved with quiet dignity, wearing traditional dresses decorated with intricate beadwork and silver ornaments. Catherine's heart raced as she wondered what this visit might mean. She had never spoken to Apache women before, and she wasn't sure what customs she should follow. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed her skirt and walked outside to greet them. The oldest of the 3 women stepped forward. She was perhaps 50 years old, with silver streaking her black hair and wise eyes that seemed to see everything. In her hands, she carried a bundle wrapped in soft deer hide. "You are the teacher," the woman said in careful English. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," Catherine replied. "I am Catherine Roberts," the woman nodded. "I am Bright Moon, grandmother to Swifthawk. This is Morning Star, his aunt. And this is Gentle Rain, his mother's sister." Catherine felt honored that they had shared their names with her. In many Native American cultures, she knew, names held power and were not given lightly to strangers. "Swifthawk told us what you did," Bright Moon continued. "You saved his life. You used your own clothing to bandage his wounds. You gave him water from your own bottle. These are not the actions of someone who sees him as less than human." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. Any person would have done the same. Bright Moon shook her head slowly. "No, many would not. We have learned this from experience. The woman unwrapped the bundle she carried, revealing the most beautiful piece of beadwork Catherine had ever seen. It was a small bag, no bigger than her hand, covered in intricate patterns of blue, white, and silver beads. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with thousands of tiny beads sewn in perfect geometric designs. This belonged to Swifthawk's mother, Bright Moon said softly. She died when he was very small. It is precious to our family, but we want you to have it. It is a small gift for a very large kindness. Catherine was overwhelmed. She understood that this was far more than a simple thank you gift. This was a family treasure, something that connected Swifthawk to his deceased mother. For them to give it to her meant they were welcoming her into something sacred. I don't know what to say, Catherine stammered. This is too precious. I can't accept something so important to your family. Morningstar spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but firm. To refuse would dishonor the gift and the giver. You are part of Swifthawk's story now. You are part of our story. Catherine carefully took the beaded bag, feeling its weight and the smoothness of the beads under her fingers. I will treasure it always, she promised. There is something else, Bright Moon said. Swifthawk wishes to continue learning from you. His father has given permission for him to come to your school. Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. This was more than she had ever dared to hope for. He would be very welcome, she said. All children are welcome in my classroom. The three women smiled at this, and Catherine saw approval in their expressions. They talked for a few more minutes, with Catherine learning more about Apache customs and the women asking questions about her teaching methods. When they left, Catherine felt like something fundamental had shifted in her world. That afternoon, Swifthawk appeared at the schoolhouse as usual, but this time he didn't hide in the rocks or lurk by the door. He walked straight up to Catherine and took a seat on one of the rough wooden benches alongside the settler children. The other students were curious, but not hostile. Catherine had spent time talking to them about kindness and respect for all people, and children were naturally more accepting than adults. Within minutes, Swifthawk was participating in the lesson just like any other student. Catherine was amazed at how quickly he picked up new concepts. All those weeks of secret lessons had given him a strong foundation, and his natural intelligence did the rest. When she taught them to write their names on slate boards, Swifthawk carefully formed the letters SWIFTHAWK in neat, precise strokes. During the break, something wonderful happened. One of the younger settler children, a 6-year-old girl named Lucy, dropped her lunch bundle. Swifthawk immediately helped her pick up the scattered food, and Lucy thanked him with a shy smile. Soon, several of the children were showing Swifthawk their games and sharing their food with him. But Catherine noticed that news of Swifthawk's presence at the school was spreading quickly through the settlement. By the end of the day, a small crowd of adults had gathered near the trading post, talking in low, serious voices. Some looked concerned, others looked angry. Tom Wilson approached Catherine as she was sweeping the schoolhouse steps. His expression was troubled. Catherine, I need to talk to you about something, he said. Some of the parents are worried about having an Apache child in the school with their kids. Catherine stopped sweeping and looked at him directly. What exactly are they worried about, Tom? Well, Tom shifted uncomfortably. They're afraid it might not be safe. They don't really understand Apache ways, and they're concerned about what this might lead to. What it might lead to, Catherine repeated slowly, is a better understanding between our communities. What it might lead to is peace instead of fear. Tom nodded, but she could see he was caught between his respect for her and the pressure from the other settlers. I'm not saying I disagree with you, Catherine, but you need to know that some folks are talking about pulling their children out of school if the Apache boy keeps coming. Catherine felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to speak calmly. Tom, Swifthawk is 8 years old. He's curious, intelligent, and eager to learn. He's also the child I saved from a deadly scorpion just 2 days ago. If people can't see past his heritage to his humanity, then that says more about them than it does about him. I know, Tom said, raising his hands in a peacekeeping gesture. I'm just telling you what's being said. You need to be prepared for some pushback. That evening, Catherine sat in her room holding the precious beaded bag that Bright Moon had given her. She thought about the courage it had taken for Swifthawk to walk into that schoolhouse and sit beside children whose families saw his people as enemies. She thought about the trust his family had placed in her by allowing him to come and She thought about the fear and prejudice she would have to overcome if she wanted to continue building bridges between the two communities. Catherine made a decision that night that would change everything. She would not let fear win. She would not let ignorance triumph over education. She would continue teaching Swifthawk, no matter what the consequences might be. But she had no idea that the consequences would be far greater and more wonderful than anything she could have imagined. Because in the Apache camp, Chief Thundercloud was making decisions of his own about the white teacher who had saved his son's life. And those decisions would soon bring changes that no one in Desert Springs was prepared for. 3 days had passed since Swifthawk had started attending school regularly, and Catherine was pleased with how well things were going inside the classroom. The boy was a quick learner, and the other children had accepted him completely. They now included him in their games during breaks and helped him with difficult English words during lessons. However, Catherine was very aware of the tension building in the settlement. Several parents had approached her with concerns, and she could feel suspicious eyes watching her whenever she walked through town. The easy friendship she had begun to build with some of the settlers was becoming strained. On this particular morning, Catherine was teaching the children basic arithmetic using small stones as counting tools. Swifthawk was helping one of the younger boys understand addition when the sound of a single horse approaching made everyone look toward the window. Catherine glanced outside and felt her breath catch in her throat. The same Apache warrior who had come to collect Swifthawk after the scorpion incident was dismounting from his horse in front of the schoolhouse. But this time he was alone and he was clearly coming to see her. "Children, please continue with your counting exercises," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'll be right back." She stepped outside, her heart beating fast. The warrior stood near his horse, and in the daylight, she could see him more clearly than before. He was tall and powerfully built, probably in his early 30s, with long black hair decorated with small silver ornaments. His clothing was practical but beautiful, made of soft leather and decorated with intricate beadwork. Everything about him spoke of leadership and authority. But what struck Catherine most were his eyes. They were intelligent and watchful, but not unkind. She could see where Swifthawk had gotten his quick mind and curious nature. "Miss Roberts," the man said in careful but clear English, "I am Chief Thundercloud. Swifthawk is my son." Catherine had suspected this, but hearing it confirmed made her even more nervous. She was speaking with one of the most powerful leaders in the Apache Nation, a man whose decisions could affect the lives of hundreds of people. "Chief Thundercloud," she said, offering a small bow of respect, "I'm honored to meet you. Your son is a wonderful student." The chief's expression softened slightly at her words about Swifthawk. "He speaks of you often. He says you are a good teacher, patient and kind. He also says you make learning fun." Catherine smiled. "Learning should be enjoyable. Children learn better when they're happy." Thundercloud nodded thoughtfully. "This is not the way most white teachers think. Most think learning must be hard and unpleasant to be real. I think that's wrong," Catherine said simply. "I think learning is natural for children, like breathing or laughing. We just have to help them discover what they're already capable of." The chief studied her face as she spoke, as if he were trying to read her soul through her words. Finally, he said, "I would like to see this school where my son learns." Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. No Apache adult had ever entered the schoolhouse before. This would be a historic moment, but she wasn't sure how the settler children would react. "Of course," she said. "You're very welcome." She led Thundercloud toward the schoolhouse door, then paused. "Chief Thundercloud, I should tell you that some of the settler families are concerned about Swifthawk attending school. They may not understand why you're here." Thundercloud's expression became more serious. "Are they concerned about Swifthawk or about Apache people in general?" Catherine hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Both, I think. They don't know your people well, and fear often grows from ignorance." "And you?" Thundercloud asked. "Do you fear Apache people?" Catherine looked directly into his eyes. "I fear ignorance and hatred, Chief Thundercloud. I don't fear people who love their children and want them to learn." Something in Thundercloud's expression shifted at her words, and Catherine thought she saw approval there. They entered the schoolhouse together. The children looked up as they walked in, and Catherine saw their eyes grow wide at the sight of the tall Apache chief. But to their credit, none of them seemed frightened. Swift Hawk jumped up from his seat with a huge smile. "Father," he said in English, clearly proud to show off his new language skills. Thundercloud smiled back at his son, and Catherine saw a warmth in his face that transformed his entire appearance. This was not just a powerful chief, this was a loving father who was proud of his child's accomplishments. "Show me what you are learning," Thundercloud said to Swift Hawk. Swift Hawk eagerly led his father to the blackboard where Catherine had written the day's arithmetic lesson. In careful English, he explained how addition worked, using the stones as examples. Thundercloud listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood both the math and the teaching method. Then Swift Hawk picked up a piece of chalk and wrote his name on the blackboard in neat letters. Thundercloud stared at the writing for a long moment, and Catherine saw something that might have been pride, mixed with sadness in his expression. "This is good learning," Thundercloud said finally. "This will help you in the changing world." Catherine invited Thundercloud to sit and observe the rest of the morning lesson. He settled on one of the back benches, his large frame making the child-sized furniture look tiny. The settler children were initially nervous, but Thundercloud's quiet presence and obvious interest in learning helped them relax. During the lesson, Catherine taught the children about different types of plants that grew in the desert. She was explaining how cactus plants stored water when Thundercloud spoke up. "The Apache people know many things about desert plants," he said. "We know which ones can heal sickness, which ones are good to eat, which ones can be made into useful tools." Catherine's eyes lit up. "Would you be willing to share some of that knowledge with the children?" Thundercloud looked surprised by the request, but then he nodded. He stood and walked to the front of the classroom, moving with natural authority. For the next 30 minutes, he shared knowledge that had been passed down through generations of his people. He told them about plants that could stop bleeding, plants that could ease stomach pain, and plants that could be woven into baskets or rope. The children listened with fascination, asking eager questions. Even Catherine learned things she had never known about the desert she now called home. When the impromptu lesson ended, Thundercloud returned to his seat. Catherine continued with her planned lesson, but she could feel that something had changed in the room. The children were looking at Thundercloud with respect and curiosity instead of fear. After the morning lessons ended and the children were dismissed for lunch, Thundercloud remained behind. He and Catherine sat together in the empty schoolhouse, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. "You teach well," Thundercloud said finally. "You listen to your students. You value what they bring to learning. This is the Apache way too." "Thank you," Catherine said. "I believe every child has wisdom inside them. Our job as teachers is to help them find it and share it." Thundercloud was quiet for a long time, seeming to think deeply about something. Finally, he spoke again. "The Apache people have watched you since you came here. We have seen how you treat Swift Hawk, how you treat all children. We have seen that you try to build bridges instead of walls." Catherine waited, sensing that he had more to say. "There are changes coming to this land," Thundercloud continued. "Changes that will affect both our peoples. Those who can work together will survive and prosper. Those who cannot—" He left the sentence unfinished. "I hope we can work together," Catherine said quietly. "I think our children deserve a future where they can learn from each other." Thundercloud stood to leave, then turned back to face her. "Miss Roberts, my people have a saying. When someone saves your child, they become part of your family. You saved Swift Hawk's life. This makes you important to the Apache people." Catherine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Swift Hawk is important to me, too. All my students are." Thundercloud nodded, then surprised her by extending his hand in the white man's gesture of respect. Catherine shook it, feeling the strength and calluses that spoke of a life spent outdoors and in leadership. "I will return," Thundercloud said. "There are things we should discuss about Swift Hawk's education and about other matters." After he left, Catherine sat alone in the schoolhouse, trying to process what had just happened. A powerful Apache chief had not only visited her school, but had taught a lesson to her students. He had spoken about building bridges and working together for the future. Most importantly, he had said she was now considered part of the Apache family because she had saved Swift Hawk's life. Catherine had the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine, and she was both excited and terrified about what those changes might bring. 2 weeks had passed since Chief Thundercloud's first visit to the schoolhouse, and he had returned several times since then. Each visit had a stated purpose: discussing Swifthawk's progress, sharing knowledge about desert survival, or bringing small gifts from the Apache community to thank Catherine for her kindness. But Catherine was beginning to sense there was something more behind these visits. Thundercloud would linger after their discussions about Swifthawk's education, asking thoughtful questions about her life back in Boston, her reasons for coming west, her hopes for the future. Their conversations had grown longer and more personal with each meeting. Catherine found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit. Thundercloud was intelligent and well-spoken, with a dry sense of humor that often surprised her. He listened carefully when she talked, asking questions that showed he truly understood her thoughts and feelings. In many ways, he was easier to talk to than most of the white men she had known back east. On this particular afternoon, Thundercloud arrived at the schoolhouse carrying a beautifully woven basket. The children had been dismissed for the day, and Catherine was cleaning the blackboard when she heard his horse approach. "Chief Thundercloud," she said, greeting him with a smile that had become natural over the past weeks. "What brings you here today?" "I wanted to share something with you," he said, dismounting and securing his horse. "And there is something important I need to discuss." Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness at the serious tone in his voice. Had something happened? Was there trouble between the Apache and the settlers? Had someone complained about Swifthawk's presence at the school? Thundercloud followed her into the schoolhouse and set the basket on her desk. "This is from the women of my tribe," he said. "They wanted you to have it." Catherine lifted the lid of the basket and gasped. Inside were the most beautiful things she had ever seen. Intricate beadwork, soft leather gloves decorated with silver, a small mirror with a handle carved from bone, and dried herbs that filled the air with a wonderful scent. "This is too much," Catherine said, overwhelmed by the generosity. "I can't accept gifts this valuable." "The women insist," Thundercloud said gently. "They say you have brought honor to our community by treating Swifthawk with respect and kindness. They want you to know you are valued." Catherine touched the soft leather gloves, marveling at the delicate beadwork. "Please tell them how grateful I am. These are the most beautiful things I've ever owned." Thundercloud nodded, but Catherine could see he was still troubled by something. He seemed to be gathering his courage for whatever important matter he had come to discuss. "Miss Roberts." "Catherine," he said, using her first name for the first time. "There is something I must tell you about myself." Catherine set down the gloves and gave him her full attention. "My wife died 2 years ago when Swifthawk was 6, Thundercloud began, his voice quiet with old pain. "She was trying to give birth to our second child, but something went wrong. We lost them both, my wife and the baby." Catherine's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Thundercloud nodded in acknowledgement. "For 2 years I have raised Swifthawk alone. My mother and sisters help, but a boy needs more than that. He needs someone who can teach him about both worlds, the Apache world and the white world that is coming whether we want it or not." Catherine wasn't sure where this conversation was leading, but she sensed it was important. "Since you came into our lives," Thundercloud continued, "I have watched my son change. He is happier, more curious, more confident. You have given him something I could not give him alone, hope for his future in a changing world." "Swifthawk is a special boy," Catherine said. "Any teacher would be lucky to work with him." Thundercloud shook his head. "No, it is not just teaching. You care for him as if he were your own child. You risked your life to save him from the scorpion. You defend him against those who would judge him for his heritage. You see his heart, not just his skin." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. She had grown to love Swifthawk deeply over these past weeks, and hearing Thundercloud acknowledge that meant everything to her. "There is something else," Thundercloud said, and now his voice carried a different kind of nervousness. "I have been watching you, Catherine Roberts, not just as Swifthawk's teacher, but as a woman." Catherine's heart began to beat faster. She had sensed a growing connection between them during their conversations, but she had told herself it was just friendship and mutual respect. "I have seen your strength," Thundercloud continued. "Your courage when you saved my son, your wisdom in how you teach children, your kindness toward people who are different from you. I have seen your loneliness too, though you try to hide it." Catherine felt her cheeks grow warm. She had been lonely, especially in the evenings when the schoolhouse was empty and quiet. Thundercloud stood and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape. In Apache tradition, when someone saves your child's life, they become part of your family. But I find myself wanting more than that, Catherine. I find myself wanting you to become part of my family in a different way. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Thundercloud turned back to face her, his dark eyes serious but warm. I am asking you to be my wife, Catherine Roberts. I am asking you to be Swifthawk's mother. I am asking you to join your life with ours. The words hung in the air between them like something physical. Catherine felt as if the world had suddenly shifted on its axis. Of all the things she had expected when she came west to teach, a marriage proposal from an Apache chief had never even entered her mind. Thundercloud, she began, then stopped. Her mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts and emotions. You do not have to answer now, Thundercloud said quickly. I know this is unexpected. I know it would mean great changes for you. More changes than I have the right to ask. Catherine looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw a man who loved his son deeply, who led his people with wisdom and courage, who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. She saw someone who understood her passion for teaching and her love for children. She saw someone who made her laugh and challenged her to think in new ways. But she also saw the enormous challenges such a marriage would bring. She would be leaving behind her own culture, her own people's expectations, her family back in Boston. She would be entering a world she didn't fully understand, taking on responsibilities she wasn't sure she was prepared for. I need time to think, Catherine said finally. Thundercloud nodded, looking relieved that she hadn't immediately refused. Of course. This is a decision that will change both our lives. It should not be made quickly. He moved toward the door, then paused. Catherine, I want you to know that I am not asking you to stop being who you are. I am asking you to become who you are meant to be, with us. After he left, Catherine sat alone in the empty schoolhouse, her mind spinning with the magnitude of what had just happened. She picked up the carved mirror from the basket and looked at her reflection. The face looking back at her was the same, but somehow everything felt different. A marriage proposal from Chief Thundercloud, the chance to become Swifthawk's mother, the opportunity to truly bridge two worlds instead of just teaching children about them, but also the risk of losing everything she had known and loved about her old life. Catherine knew she had the most important decision of her life to make, and she had no idea what the right answer was. Catherine barely slept that night. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while Thundercloud's words echoed in her mind. I am asking you to be my wife. The proposal had been so unexpected, so completely outside anything she had ever imagined for her life. She rose before dawn and made herself a cup of tea, sitting by her small window as the first light crept across the desert. The landscape looked different somehow, as if Thundercloud's proposal had changed not just her perspective on her future, but on everything around her. By the time the children arrived for school that morning, Catherine had decided she needed advice. After dismissing the students for lunch, she walked to the trading post to speak with Tom Wilson. He was one of the few people in Desert Springs who had shown understanding about her friendship with the Apache community. Tom was arranging new supplies on his shelves when Catherine entered. He took one look at her face and set down the box he was holding. You look like you haven't slept a wink, he said with concern. Everything all right? Catherine glanced around to make sure they were alone, then took a deep breath. Tom, I need to ask your advice about something important, something unusual. Tom gestured to a chair behind the counter. Sit down and tell me what's troubling you. Catherine sat, then hesitated. How could she explain something so extraordinary? What would you say if I told you that Chief Thundercloud has asked me to marry him? Tom's eyes widened and he slowly sank into his own chair. Well, he said after a long pause, I'd say that's about the most surprising thing I've heard in my 43 years on this earth. He asked me yesterday, Catherine continued. He wants me to become Swifthawk's mother and join their family. I don't know what to think. Tom was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling to process this information. Finally, he said, Catherine, I've known Thundercloud for several years through trading relationships. He's an honorable man, intelligent, and fair in his dealings. But this would be a huge step for both of you. I know, Catherine said miserably. That's why I need someone to help me think through this clearly. Do you care for him? Tom asked gently. Catherine felt her cheeks warm. Yes, I think I do. He's kind and thoughtful, and he makes me laugh. We have wonderful conversations about everything from teaching methods to philosophy, and I already love Swifthawk like my own son. But, Tom prompted, clearly sensing there was more. But I'd be giving up everything I've ever known, Catherine said. My culture, my family's expectations, probably any chance of seeing Boston again. And what about my teaching? Would I be able to continue the school? Tom nodded thoughtfully. Those are important considerations. Have you talked to Thundercloud about these concerns? Not yet. I was so shocked by the proposal that I could barely think straight. Well, my advice is to have that conversation, Tom said. Find out exactly what he's envisioning for your life together. Ask the hard questions about how this would work practically. Catherine was grateful for Tom's practical approach. But as she walked back to the schoolhouse, she realized that the logical concerns were only part of her dilemma. The bigger issue was fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of what other people would think. That afternoon, as if she had summoned him with her thoughts, Thundercloud appeared at the schoolhouse again. This time, Swifthawk was with him, and Catherine was struck again by how much the boy resembled his father. Miss Catherine. Swift, Hawk said in his careful English. I wanted to show you something. He pulled out a piece of bark and showed her markings he had carved into it. They were English words written in the Apache syllabary, a complex writing system that Catherine was just beginning to understand. I am writing a story about our school, Swifthawk explained proudly. About how you teach children from different families to learn together. Catherine's heart swelled with pride and affection for the boy. That's wonderful, Swifthawk. You're becoming quite a scholar. After Swifthawk ran off to play with some of the other children who were still around the schoolhouse, Thundercloud approached Catherine. I can see you have been thinking about what we discussed, he said, studying her face with those perceptive dark eyes. I have, Catherine admitted. And I have questions. Thundercloud nodded. I hoped you would. Important decisions should come with questions. Catherine had spent the morning organizing her thoughts, and now she voiced her concerns directly. If I were to accept your proposal, what would my life look like? Would I be able to continue teaching? Would I be expected to convert to Apache? Beliefs entirely. What about my connection to my family back east? Thundercloud listened carefully to each question. You would continue teaching, he said without hesitation. The Apache people value education highly, and we see how much good you do for all children. We would want to expand the school, bring in more Apache children alongside the settler children. Catherine felt relief at this answer. Teaching was such a core part of who she was. As for beliefs, Thundercloud continued, Apache culture honors the spiritual paths that give people strength and wisdom. We would ask that you learn our ways and participate in our ceremonies, but we would not ask you to abandon beliefs that are important to you. And my family? Thundercloud's expression grew more serious. This would be the most difficult part. The Apache people move with the seasons and the needs of our community. We could not promise regular visits to Boston, but we could arrange for letters and perhaps occasional visits when trading takes us eastward. Catherine appreciated his honesty, even though this answer worried her most. There is something else you should know, Thundercloud said. Some of the Apache people have concerns about this marriage, just as some of the white settlers do. They worry about what it means to welcome an outsider so completely into our community. And how do you respond to those concerns? I tell them that you have already proven yourself through your actions. You saved Swifthawk's life. You treat Apache children with the same respect as white children. You seek to understand our ways rather than trying to change them. These are the qualities that matter, not the color of your skin or the place where you were born. Catherine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she also felt the weight of responsibility they carried. That evening, news of Thundercloud's frequent visits to the schoolhouse had spread through the settlement. Catherine was preparing her next day's lessons when she heard voices outside, angry voices. She looked out her window and saw a group of about 8 settlers gathered near the trading post. Even from a distance, she could tell they were upset about something. A few minutes later, Tom Wilson knocked on her door. "Catherine, you need to know that some folks are pretty worked up," he said. "Word's gotten around about Thundercloud's visits, and people are making assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" "They're saying that you're getting too close to the Apache, that it's not appropriate for a white woman to be spending so much time with an Apache man. Some are even threatening to pull their children from school permanently." Catherine felt a surge of anger. "So it's fine for me to risk my life to save an Apache child, but not fine for me to have a conversation with his father?" "I'm not saying it's right," Tom said quickly. "I'm just telling you what's being said. People are scared, Catherine. They don't understand the Apache way of life, and fear makes people say stupid things." After Tom left, Catherine sat alone with her thoughts. She was beginning to understand that this decision wasn't just about her personal happiness or even about Thundercloud and Swifthawk. It was about whether she had the courage to stand up against prejudice and fear, whether she was willing to help build a bridge between two worlds that seemed determined to remain separate. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous. But, as she looked at the beautiful gifts the Apache women had given her, as she thought about Swifthawk's bright smile and Thundercloud's gentle strength, Catherine realized that her heart was already beginning to know what her mind was still struggling to accept. The question wasn't whether she was brave enough to say yes to Thundercloud's proposal. The question was whether she was brave enough to follow her heart, no matter what the consequences might be. Catherine spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with her decision. She made lists of reasons to accept Thundercloud's proposal and reasons to decline. She wrote long letters to her sister back in Boston that she never sent, trying to explain feelings and circumstances that seemed impossible to put into words. But on the 4th morning, as she watched Swifthawk help a younger student with his reading, Catherine's heart finally gave her the answer her mind had been seeking. This wasn't just about her own happiness. It was about building a future where children like Swifthawk could grow up in a world with less fear and more understanding. That afternoon, she asked Tom Wilson if she could borrow his horse to ride out to the Apache camp. Tom's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he didn't ask questions. He simply helped her saddle the gentlest mare and gave her directions to find Thundercloud's people. The ride through the desert was both terrifying and exhilarating. Catherine had never been so far from the settlement alone, and every shadow seemed to hold potential danger. But she was determined to give Thundercloud her answer in person, in his own territory, as a sign of respect. The Apache camp was larger than she had expected, with dozens of traditional dwellings arranged in careful patterns. As she approached, people emerged to watch the white woman riding alone into their community. Children pointed and whispered, but their curiosity seemed friendly rather than hostile. Thundercloud emerged from one of the larger dwellings, his expression showing both surprise and pleasure at seeing her. "Catherine," he said, helping her down from the horse. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," Catherine said, her heart racing with nervousness and excitement. "I've come to give you my answer." Thundercloud's face became very serious. He gestured toward a quiet area at the edge of camp where they could speak privately. Several Apache women and elders followed at a respectful distance, clearly understanding that something important was happening. "I have thought carefully about your proposal," Catherine began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've considered all the challenges, all the difficulties, all the ways this could go wrong." Thundercloud's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten slightly at his sides. "And I've realized something important," Catherine continued. "I came west to teach children, to make a difference in their lives. But you and Swifthawk have taught me something even more valuable. You've taught me that love, real love, isn't about staying comfortable or safe. It's about having the courage to build something beautiful, even when the world tells you it's impossible." She took a deep breath. "My answer is yes, Thundercloud. I want to be your wife. I want to be Swifthawk's mother. I want to help build a bridge between our peoples." The transformation in Thundercloud's face was immediate and beautiful. The serious, careful expression melted away, replaced by pure joy. He stepped forward and took her hands in his dark eyes shining. "You have made me happier than I thought possible," he said softly. "You have given Swifthawk and me a gift beyond measure. The Apache people who had been watching from a distance broke into smiles and began talking excitedly among themselves. Swifthawk came running from wherever he had been playing, somehow sensing that something wonderful had happened. "Miss Catherine," he called out in English, then switched to Apache as he reached them. Thundercloud knelt down to speak with his son, explaining what had happened. Swifthawk's eyes grew wide, and then he launched himself into Catherine's arms with such enthusiasm that he nearly knocked her over. "You will be my mother?" he asked in careful English. "If you'll have me," Catherine said, hugging him tightly. "Yes," Swifthawk said, his face glowing with happiness.
"Yes, yes, yes."
The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Planning a wedding that would honor both Apache and white traditions was complex, but the community on both sides seemed determined to make it work. Catherine was amazed by how supportive most people turned out to be. While a few settlers remained disapproving, many more were curious and even excited about this unprecedented union. They had seen how happy Swifthawk was at school, how well he got along with their children, and how respected Thundercloud was even among white traders. The Apache women took Catherine under their wings, teaching her traditional songs and customs, while also incorporating elements from her own background. They created a wedding dress that was unlike anything ever seen before, white silk, decorated with intricate Apache beadwork and silver ornaments. Tom Wilson surprised everyone by offering to host the wedding feast at the trading post, creating a neutral space where both communities could come together safely. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect blue sky that seemed to exist only in the desert. Catherine woke in her small room behind the schoolhouse for the last time, nervous but absolutely certain she was making the right choice. The ceremony itself was extraordinary. Thundercloud and Catherine exchanged vows in both English and Apache, promising to honor each other's cultures while building something new together. Swifthawk stood beside them, proudly holding the rings, a simple gold band for Catherine and a silver band decorated with turquoise for Thundercloud. The trading post had been transformed for the celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of food from both cultures: roasted meat, cornbread, traditional Apache dishes that Catherine was still learning to prepare, and apple pie that the settler women had insisted on contributing. Children from both communities played together in the yard, their laughter providing a soundtrack of hope for the future. Catherine watched them and felt tears of happiness in her eyes. This was what she had dreamed of when she first came west: not just education, but true understanding between peoples. As the sun set over the desert, Thundercloud took Catherine's hand and led her outside where they could speak privately. "Are you ready for this new life?" he asked gently. Catherine looked back at the celebration, where Apache and white families were sharing food and stories, where Swifthawk was teaching other children Apache words while they taught him new English phrases. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," she said. 6 months later, Catherine's school had tripled in size. Apache children now sat alongside settler children every day, learning English and arithmetic, while also studying traditional Apache knowledge that Thundercloud and other tribal members shared. Catherine had become not just a teacher, but a translator between worlds. When disputes arose between the communities, people came to her and Thundercloud for help in finding solutions. When Apache families needed help understanding white customs for trading, Catherine was there to explain. When settler families wanted to learn about the plants and animals of the desert, Apache elders came to share their wisdom. Swifthawk flourished in this environment, becoming fluent in both languages and serving as a bridge between the children of both communities. He was growing into exactly what Thundercloud had hoped: a young man prepared to succeed in a changing world, while staying connected to his Apache heritage. One evening, as Catherine was preparing lessons for the next day, Thundercloud found her at the desk they now shared in their home. "Do you ever regret your choice?" he asked, settling beside her. Catherine looked up from her papers and smiled. "Never. Not even for a moment." She gestured toward the window, where they could see children from both communities playing together in the yard of their expanded school. "This is what I came west to find," she said. "I just didn't know it when I started." Thundercloud took her hand and squeezed it gently. "The scorpion that threatened Swifthawk's life brought us all together. Sometimes dangerous things lead to the most beautiful outcomes." Catherine laughed softly. Swifthawk likes to say that the scorpion was actually a gift from the spirits sent to bring our families together. He may be right, Thundercloud said. Apache wisdom teaches that everything happens for a reason, even things that seem like disasters at the time. As they sat together in the peaceful evening, Catherine reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Arizona as a single woman hoping to teach a few children their letters. She was now a wife, a mother, and a bridge builder between two worlds. The little girl back in Boston who had dreamed of adventure could never have imagined this particular story. But the woman Catherine had become couldn't imagine wanting any other life. Love had indeed transcended all boundaries, cultural, racial, and social. And in the process, it had created something beautiful and lasting that would benefit generations to come. The school that had started with a handful of settler children and one curious Apache boy, watching from the rocks, had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear, love over prejudice, and hope over hatred. And it all began the day a brave teacher saw a deadly scorpion threatening a child and chose to act with her heart instead of her fears.